So welcome, thank you for being on the panel. I'm going to start with you, William. The title of your paper was APS Labs Could Be the Ultimate GovTech Sandbox. So definitely about building capability, definitely kind of on message with some of the things that the Minister was saying this morning. Just talk us through what an APS Labs sandbox would look like.
Yeah, I guess it does got to support a lot of what the Minister was saying, that if we want to have these smaller investments, you need a way to integrate them. And so you can't get everything. If everyone's reinventing the wheel, you can't get far with a single digit investment. You have to be able to combine all of that into a bigger thing. I mean, I've worked on billion-dollar projects, building very complex systems, and I actually have delivered a single digit investment. I delivered e-tax 20 plus years ago for the government. That was a single digit investment that had massive returns. But all of those things need to be able to interoperate. So the concept that I'm putting forward with the labs is, how does the government work with industry to create more interoperability? Because at the end of the day, all that money that's going into, it's a portfolio of investment that has to be, someone has to coordinate. And I actually quite liked, I'm going to use that now, I'm part of the untouchables. I don't know what that means, but I mean, that's what I did a Bachelor of Applied Science back in the 80s in IT, right? And I like to apply things. And so the concept of the labs is actually, how do you convince people? You convince them by showing them it can be done. And so that's really my view, is that too much of these projects are done within silos. And so everyone's reinventing the wheel, everyone's trying to solve the problem on their own. How do we create more places that people can work together, whether that's from government and industry and academia? How do we get those kind of places? And in Canberra, why don't we have a tech precinct? Like, why don't we have it? I mean, if you're a Canberra company, where do you go if you want to scale? Like, you have to go somewhere else. And so, yeah, so the lab sort of brings together these concepts of reuse. You know, how do you drive reuse? My experience is you need to have an architecture to integrate things, and you need to actually test things. So that T part of the invest is probably the most important part. You need to be able to test it. So therefore, you need a working product. So that there's I'm happy to hear that the Minister wants to do that, but we need a way to get lots of people working towards some common goal. So what are those missions? How do you get people together to work on them?
So just to extend, and I should have framed this panel session a little bit before we started. So Reason Group and Agile Digital are both Canberra-based, Australian-owned digital delivery companies who do work with both the federal government and state governments, but also the private sector. But top of the game in terms of the kind of digital delivery that the Minister was talking about. Patrick Kidd in Future Skills Organisation is part of the government's skills infrastructure to build out precisely what the Minister was talking about. He was talking in the public sector, but Patrick will talk more broadly. Just quickly, William, this APS Labs, I mean, if data is the new oil, then the federal government has a lot of oil. Is this what we're...
It's actually an interesting point. In Australia, I think this is the other thing. I'm the beneficiary of public investment. Like, I've educated here. I've worked overseas through defence projects, air traffic control projects. So, I'm the beneficiary of good public money investment. And when you look at the government in our context, it's one of the, if not the biggest customer we have, and it has the most data of anyone. So when we talk about AI, like, who's best placed to actually move the needle on that? I mean, and so at the moment we have a posture which is like, whoa, let's not go there. I mean, we need to go the other way, to be successful. So yeah, that oil that's sitting untapped, in our public institutions, yeah, how do we get that? And the only way, I mean, I was speaking to the head of the DTA the other day, and we have a massive trust deficit now. I mean, look at the press. No one trusts anyone. So, and again, the best way to build trust is to work together. And so that's, again, if we're not creating places that people are working together, getting to know each other, building trust, the technology won't solve these problems. It's the people working together that will solve the problem. So yeah, to get that value, you need the people. And we just heard about getting more people that know about AI, but they need to have somewhere to work, and they need to work together.
Yeah, trust deficit, that's an interesting term. And, you know, the exemplar in all of this is the New South Wales government. I think people would agree on this. They had specific strategies around rollouts of, you know, fishing licences, then boat licences, then car licences, as a way to build trust in these digital delivery platforms. Okay, let's talk to David Elliot for a minute. Your paper was called We Are Fumbling Australia's Digital Sovereignty. A lot of what William just talked about and Bill, Mr. Shorten said, it points to kind of cultural change in a giant organisation that is the APS. So I want to ask you firstly about lemon markets. If you want to know about lemon markets, read David's article. But talk to me about the kinds of cultural and process changes that would see some of the stuff that William's talking about delivered.
Thanks, James. Is this on?
Yep.
You're on? Good, there you go. I'm not sure if the off switch is up or down. So unfortunately, the Minister, Mr. Shorten, cribbed many of my speaking notes this morning. In fact, my article had been inspired largely by a speech that he gave at the AFR Summit, sometime I'm going to say June, and it got me thinking about it. I think a lot of folks would get it. It would pass the pub test that it's not appropriate to spend $500 million on a business register and get naught for that. I think people understand that problem, but folks aren't quite sure what to do about it, including our leaders, Minister Shorten. I would say when I hear Minister Husick speaking, Senator Pocock, noting that his advisor is in the room, they are leading us to the future, but they don't have a tool or a handle to pull on that. Now, I think the way that Minister Shorten spoke about the INVST model is sensible, because we do need to chunk things down, get one thing at a time, reduce the complexity so we can start to have a faster cadence of success. I would think of it, if you had the model set up right, and I think the Minister has a good idea on that line, that we'd have a goose that could lay golden eggs, which are projects that actually work and deliver value to our society. And by that I mean actually move the needles of human impact in society, which also is not really gauged well in our IT projects. So I think there's now an understanding of what needs to be done. I think shifting the culture is a big challenge, and shifting the marketplace, which I've glibly described as the lemon marketplace. There's a lot of momentum or inertia in what's happening right now. So that inertia will need to be changed via leadership. It will be from the Hill, to a counterpoint to the Minister. That leadership will need to come from the Hill to move that momentum, to have this golden goose that can lay digital services that work for the citizenry. And if a digital project isn't moving the needle in a social metric, economic metric, or a cultural metric, then I would terminate the project. They need to be funded in an agile fashion. So if we look at the way that projects fund in this town, for those who aren't from Canberra or Canberra IT, there'll be a lot of business case work, and it will unlock $200, $300, $400 million. And then the ship sets off to sea, and that money's going to get spent. Even if the ship encounters stormy weather or icebergs, it just hurtles through. We would need to have a way of budgeting and funding government projects where they could be funded in a quanta of 3 months, stage gate. How are we doing? Are we learning lessons to close it down, or learning lessons to move forward, and just run it in quanta? That unfortunately tracks back to Minister Gallagher's Department of Finance about how things are funded. So I've rambled. My answer would be, to drive the change, we need to drive change, I think, in the way that digital projects and programs are funded in the first place.
Okay, so just before we move on from you, I wanted to ask you about how the public service, in addition to funds its programs, but also builds its own skills base, right? So, I mean, obviously, consultants have been in the news in the last 10 months or so, particularly in the federal government. So there is a system currently in place, and that system isn't working for us. So you came up with some ideas in your paper, how to reorganise that.
I mean, Minister Shorten spoke to this matter where if you're going to deliver a service for society, you need the people who can touch society to lead that, which is the APS. They are the mission tech leaders because they understand the actual purpose of doing it. The purpose is not to deploy a financial system. The purpose is to help a disabled person be remitted for needs. So the purpose must come from the APS. My feeling is, and I think I share this with Minister Gallagher, that the APS staffing caps hollowed out the APS's capacity to be that mission tech leader. And if you don't have a strong counterparty, it's hard to do good work. It's kind of like a weak handshake. So I do believe that we need to, and this is happening now under the current government, to rebuttress the capacity of the APS to lead these projects and be a good governance partner in delivery. There is no value in having a client, if you're a consultant or an implementer, that can't be a good, strong director of the project.
Okay, Patrick Kidd. Patrick's article with Istavij. Title was "We Need a Common Language for Digital Skills." There were some quite remarkable numbers that actually came out of Toby Walsh's session. So 100,000. There's a shortage of 100,000 IT tech people today, but 25% increase in the number of UNSW computer science students. David's just talked about skills in the federal government, and there's some kind of special issues around that. But if you're looking economy-wide, how do we fill that 100,000 and the next 100,000 that's coming on top?
So I think that was a fairly optimistic view from Toby, to be honest. 100,000 is like thin end of the wedge. We're talking about trying to grow 1.2 million workforce, a technology-focused expert workforce of 1.2 million by 2030. When you start to break down the numbers, that equals sort of like 60,000 people a year we should be generating. Our current education and training system trains less than 10,000 people a year. That's combining vet with higher education. So we've got like a gap of 50,000 people. That isn't going to get filled by skilled migration. That's not going to get filled by putting more people into courses. That's going to get filled by us thinking fundamentally differently about how we develop and nurture skills across our economy to get people into this space. So we have to start to think differently about what these skills are, how to curate those skills. And when you think about sort of the world of ICT, I mean, even the term of it is irrelevant in terms of sort of how we live and how we operate. We now live in a digital world. We are digitally minded, and yet we still have great swathes of our society and communities that are not in that space. They don't have access to technology. So 23.6% of people are digitally excluded, so they can't participate. Less than half of the people in our schools receive any formalised type of ICT training. So we have to start to think about how do we mature our education and skilling system so that it starts to move away from being almost accidental and presumably what it was sort of 20, 30 years ago when this whole thing started, so it becomes formalised and integrated across everything that we do. I was on a conversation yesterday with some school teachers from New South Wales. The curriculum in New South Wales for teachers hasn't changed in 20 years. So when they talk about ICT for teachers, what is taught is floppy disks. So we are a million miles away from where we need to be if we're going to be serious about trying to grow a workforce, a community that is able to thrive and prosper in this world with the right skills to be able to exist, survive and move forward. So I think this whole thing is connected. What we need to do is to really link these things up so that we have a much more systematic, strategic approach to how we're developing people with the right skills. We need to think differently and more broadly about how to bring people into the pipeline. We have to open up opportunities for people who traditionally you never would have considered, people who wouldn't be able to get into university in a traditional sense with our current education system. And how do we open up those pipelines to people so that we can actually start to get after the numbers that are there? So I think the challenge is very deep-rooted. It's a fundamental linkage between industry, government, education and training, still highly fragmented, and it's definitely time to take this thing seriously and begin to move forwards. The paper that we wrote with the ADIA, so with Ishtar, was trying to get at the very sort of basis of this, which is the idea of the fact that in the first instance we need to have an absolute commitment as a nation to upskilling everybody for work, learning and life. Old people, mid-career people, young people, the very young people. We need, if we're going to be successful to do that, we need to have a language, a common language that defines and describes the skills that we need. Without that language, we can't move forwards because it's too complicated, it's too confusing for people to try and train to that level, to that approach. And then the third piece is that we need to find a way of delivering these skills at scale. So we should be clear about what does good enough look like. Is there a standard that we should be trying to describe that gets everybody moving up to a point? It doesn't matter if you can't get there. What matters is the fact that you know where you're trying to get to. Then you can measure, then you can assess, and then you can work out where you need to intervene. But at the moment, we are a way off that. and we need to sort of like come together to sort of really drive the change that we need.
So just to follow up quickly, I guess technology, the great thing about technology, very horizontal, supports all industries, everyone, everywhere, all the time. So that complicates things in terms of messaging, in terms of, like trying to encourage someone to do computer science, that person might say, no, I have no interest in computer science, but I do want to design, I do want to design computer games. So how do we firstly, where do you start? Like across the portfolios up on the hill, where do you start? Who do you talk to? What's the low-hanging fruit to get things moving? Is it culture? What is it?
I think where you start is by being clear about what the skills are that we need to have in our economy. So that comes right back to that point, which is let's define some standards in terms of levels of skills that we want people to get to. And then I think you have to start to then focus on the highest priority needs. So if the highest priority needs is filling the gap of 20,000 cyber experts that we need to have in this country by 2026, then let's focus on that. And then we'll start to move ourselves in the right direction. And if we start to become more focused, rather than talking about things like computer science, which are very broad, we then start to appeal to people who wouldn't think about computer science, but they are quite interested in sort of fighting a war on the cyber front. And so I think there are ways of bringing ourselves together by opening up pathways, by thinking about what these skills look like differently so that we are making them more appealing to more people.
All right, I'm going to open up to questions in just a sec. If anyone has questions about government service delivery, skills. Natalie, while we're moving to Natalie, I just wanted to, on the statutory declarations, cost a couple of $1 million, massive impact. And then on the other side of that, 2 examples of failures, the entitlement calculator and the business register. So that seems pretty straightforward. And if there's only two people working on that stat dec modernisation or digitisation, then maybe we don't need all these skills. Why is this so hard? I'll go to you, William.
Well, look, I think those 2 people are probably standing on the shoulders of giants. That's why they can move fast. Because they're actually, I think, we always used to say standards are great, there's so many to choose from. And so I think to convince people to standardise, to adopt, to make, and that's part of my purpose, like that interoperability. If you want to move fast, you can't build from scratch. So the reason that they can move fast is they're building on something else. If they're not reinventing it, they're not. So the reason they spend $100 million on a project is often because they're reinventing the wheel. So when you look at what's the difference, like you look at projects, what's the difference? That's what you'll find, that the people are building things they shouldn't be building. They're making a problem unique when it's not. And so that is really the root cause of a lot of it.
All right, Natalie.
So the Minister was talking about small projects rather than going for the really large ones, basically testing out innovative type of approaches. So the SBIR program, which is in the US, is pretty much being able to get innovative things in, grow them, low risk, low amount of money in the first place. So are you aware of them? And I know that the government was bringing them in, brought them in a few locations, federally and state, and then it kind of all dropped off. So are you aware of the program, and are you supportive of perhaps this is an approach that could be used going forward to put these sort of things in?
Shall I take that one? I know a bit about SBIR. I know that in our federal government there is the BRII program, where a government department or agency can go out with a challenge, take innovative approaches, and then commit with a small quanta of funding to prove the MVP, to prove the hypothesis. I don't know why BRII has not scaled out, personally. I know that Minister Husick thinks about why that hasn't scaled. I do suspect that in some sense, in any path of life, to get a good answer, you've got to ask a good question. And I feel that the government at the minute has a hard time asking a really good question to narrow it down onto an outcome. Because to say, I mean, a project that hasn't been mentioned this morning is the travel tracking system at ABH, inspired by the helicopter incident down in Victoria. And I think they're about $70 million into that to just track travel expenses, which is a lot of reinventing the wheel. But I think at the very genesis of that, the question wasn't asked very well. If we don't ask a good question, we can't go out to an SBR type program and get sensible answers. So I think it comes back to the government's own capability to understand the terrain, their mission goals, and ask those good questions, and then engage. Because I do support the idea of SBIR and BRI, of course, hugely I support that. But I don't know why exactly it's not taken off here.
Not enough money in the first place put into it as a pilot project, perhaps.
Yeah?
Usually a little bit of money is sort of thrown at things, not seriously, and then it gets too hard and so it doesn't get taken up again. Because SBIRD is the equivalent of SBIR for defence, and it was up and then it's not anymore as well. So it seems to happen across all of the country. And I think more effort perhaps needs to be put into it.
It's a fair thesis.
I was just going to add to that. I think one of the criticisms and what they're trying to fix with ASCA now is the pathway to procurement. So if you run little projects and then there's this gap, like I'm a business person, like if I can't see pathway to continue to make money, this is all very good, but let's do a 3-month project. But then if I don't have a project after that or a project after that, so you need to build certainty for business as well, right? And so when you run these programs, then there's this chasm, you'll do that, and then we'll wait, we'll evaluate, we might wait 6 months, that doesn't work. And so I think that's what they're trying to fix. So what's the sort of again, it's like just managing a portfolio of investments. You've got to have that sort of the bird's eye view. And so if you lose that and you just do these little point things, that's all great, single digit, but you won't get value out of it.
Thank you. I think this one's for William. You mentioned a trust deficit, and I wondered if you could speak more a bit about that and maybe expand on what you think people might be afraid of.
Look, I'm living through it. So I'm a Canberra business. We've had so many reviews in the last 12 months of these failed projects. We've had the PwC debacle that's happened. We've had very senior public servants called into question. So no one trusts anyone. I mean, there's sort of a shadow ban on using suppliers in government, and the departments are being told, do not trust suppliers. Now, how do you do anything good in that environment? Like everything good comes from relationships and trusting someone. Like, would you get someone to do something important for you that you don't trust? So just think about it. So like globally, I mean, I look at the world. I mean, we're sort of in this world now where no one trusts anyone. I mean, I grew up through a period where the Iron Curtain fell. It was glasnost. I could travel anywhere. But it was a borderless world, and we're back in this world of borders. And so that's my perspective. When I talk about that, I think about it at that level. But then very practically, when I go now and engage with the customer in the government, they're almost told, don't trust me. And so, I just think we have to, again, I think this needs some really deep thought about how do we work together to define or redefine how we work in a trusted way. Because if we can't, we are doomed. Honestly, we are doomed if we can't. So that's kind of what I mean by that. It sort of cuts across lots of layers.
All right, on that happy note, I'm going to draw this panel to a close. Thank you, William Scheer, David Elliot and Patrick Kidd, for your insights. I just want to make a note also, as good-looking and erudite as these gentlemen are, we are very conscious that this is an all-male panel. I want the audience to know we do think about these things. We don't go into it blind on this particular subject at this particular time. These gentlemen were the best candidates for the job.